the first pale light of dawn crept slowly over the Wasatch Mountains, painting the peaks surrounding Park City, Utah, in the softest shades of rose and gold. It was the spring of 1883, and the mining town nestled in the valley below still slumbered peacefully, save for the occasional crow of a rooster or the distant clank of machinery from the mines that never truly slept. In a modest wooden building on Main Street, above a shop bearing the carefully painted sign E. Thornbridge Scientific Instruments and Precision Tools, Elias Thornbridge stirred in his narrow iron bed. The quilts, hand-stitched by his late mother years ago in Philadelphia, provided warmth against the mountain morning chill that seeped through the timber walls despite the calendar's insistence that spring had arrived. Elias opened his eyes slowly, gazing at the familiar ceiling boards above him, watching as the growing light revealed the grain of the pine wood, each knot and whirl a map he had memorized during countless mornings such as this. The routine of waking was a gentle one, unhurried and methodical, much like the precise nature of his work with delicate instruments. From somewhere down the street, he could hear the faint clip-clop of horses' hooves on the packed dirt road, likely the early delivery wagon from the bakery, bringing fresh bread to the various boarding houses and hotels that serviced the ever-growing population of miners, merchants, and fortune-seekers who called Park City home. Elias sat up slowly, his 42 years making themselves known in the slight stiffness of his joints after a night's rest. He reached for his wire-rimmed spectacles on the small table beside his bed, carefully cleaning them with a soft cloth before placing them on his nose. The world came into sharp focus, and he smiled softly at the familiar comfort of clear vision. His morning ablutions were a ritual as precise as any measurement he might take in his workshop below. Rising from bed, he patted in his wool socks across the smooth wooden floor, worn to a gentle polish by years of footsteps, to the washstand in the corner of his modest bedroom. The porcelain basin and pitcher, decorated with small blue flowers, had traveled with him from Philadelphia when he'd made the journey west 8 years prior, seeking new opportunities in the booming mining towns where precision instruments were in constant demand. The water in the pitcher was cold, having sat through the night, but Elias had long ago grown accustomed to this. In fact, he found the brisk sensation of cold water on his face to be invigorating, a proper wake-up call to begin the day. He poured the water carefully into the basin, the gentle splashing sound mixing with the growing chorus of birds outside his window. Elias understood, perhaps better than many of his contemporaries in this rough mining town, the importance of regular bathing and cleanliness. His scientific background and reading of medical journals that occasionally made their way west had educated him on the newer theories about disease prevention through hygiene, though many still scoffed at such notions. He began his morning washing ritual by first cleaning his hands thoroughly with a bar of Castile soap he ordered specially from a supplier in San Francisco. The soap, made from olive oil, was gentler on the skin than the harsh lye soaps commonly available, though considerably more expensive. He worked the soap into a lather, carefully cleaning under his nails with a small brush, a habit that marked him as peculiar among the rougher elements of Park City society, but one that he maintained religiously. Next, he washed his face, the cold water and soap removing the night's accumulation of oil and dust. Park City, with its constant mining activity, produced a fine dust that seemed to settle on everything, finding its way through the smallest gaps in windows and doors. He had learned to seal his workshop instruments under glass covers each evening to protect them from this pervasive grit. After washing his face, Elias proceeded with his dental care, another practice that set him apart from many of his neighbors. He had fashioned his own tooth-cleaning powder from a recipe he'd found in a scientific journal, a mixture of chalk, salt, and a small amount of soap, flavored with wintergreen oil when he could obtain it from the apothecary. Using a boar bristle brush, he carefully cleaned his teeth, having observed that those who maintained this practice seemed to suffer fewer tooth ailments than those who didn't. The practice of dental hygiene was not common in Park City. Many of the miners and laborers he knew suffered from terrible tooth decay, often resorting to having teeth pulled by the local barber surgeon when the pain became unbearable. Elias had witnessed such procedures, the patient fortified with whiskey, gripping the arms of the barber chair while the tooth was wrenched free with iron pliers. He shuddered slightly at the memory and continued his careful brushing. Shaving came next, a ritual he performed every other day. His straight razor, a fine Sheffield steel blade he'd inherited from his father, required careful maintenance. He stropped it slowly on the leather hanging beside his mirror, the rhythmic swooshing sound meditative in its regularity. The shaving soap, worked into a lather in his ceramic mug with a badger hair brush, filled his small room with the scent of bay rum and lavender. He applied the warm lather to his face with circular motions, the brush soft against his skin. The act of shaving required precision and patience, qualities that served him well in his profession. Each stroke of the razor was deliberate and careful, the blade gliding smoothly across his skin, leaving clean paths through the white foam. He had seen men rush to Dr. Hodges's office with severe gashes from careless shaving, and he had no desire to join their number. Once his morning hygiene was complete, Elias dressed carefully for the day. His wardrobe, while modest, was well maintained. He believed that a man in his profession, crafting precise instruments for surveyors, assayers, and mining engineers, should present himself as orderly and meticulous in appearance as he was in his work. He pulled on his cotton union suit, the one-piece undergarment that provided warmth in the cool mountain mornings. Over this went his wool trousers, carefully pressed with the flat iron he heated on his small stove each Sunday evening. His white cotton shirt, though showing signs of age at the cuffs and collar, was clean and carefully mended where necessary. He had learned basic needlework out of necessity, there being no wife or sister to tend to such matters for him. His vest, a dark gray wool that hid the inevitable stains from oil and metal polish that were occupational hazards, had numerous small pockets perfect for holding the various small tools and measuring devices he might need throughout the day. He checked each pocket by habit, his jeweler's loop, a small pair of calipers, his pocket watch, a precise Swiss timepiece that was both tool and treasure, and a small notebook with pencil for recording orders and observations. Finally, he donned his coat, a practical black wool garment that had served him well through 3 Utah winters. Though the spring days were growing warmer, the mornings still held enough chill to warrant the extra layer. He would remove it once the sun had properly warmed his workshop, but for now, it was a welcome protection against the mountain air. Before leaving his bedroom, Elias made his bed with military precision, smoothing the quilts and arranging the pillows just so. Order in small things, he believed, led to order in greater things. A cluttered living space meant a cluttered mind, and a cluttered mind could not properly calibrate a theodolite or adjust the delicate gears of a chronometer. Descending the narrow staircase that led from his living quarters to the shop below, Elias's footsteps echoed softly in the morning quiet. The shop was his sanctuary, filled with the tools of his trade and the various instruments in different stages of completion or repair. But before he could begin his work, he needed sustenance. His kitchen, really just a corner of the back room behind the shop, consisted of a small cast iron stove, a sink with a hand pump that drew water from the well behind the building, and a modest collection of cookware. Breakfast was typically a simple affair, but one he never skipped, having read in his medical journals about the importance of regular meals for maintaining good health. He stoked the fire in the stove, adding a few pieces of split pine to the coals that had been banked from the night before. The wood caught quickly, crackling pleasantly, and beginning to warm the space. While waiting for the stove to heat properly, he pumped fresh water into his kettle, the handle of the pump squeaking slightly, a sound that had become as familiar as his own breathing. His breakfast consisted of oatmeal porridge, a food that many associated with poverty but which Elias valued for its nutritional properties and digestive benefits. He had read about the Scottish people's longevity and strength, often attributed to their diet of oats, and had incorporated the grain into his daily routine. To the porridge, he added a spoonful of molasses for sweetness and energy, and when available, dried apple pieces that he purchased from Mrs. Chen's general store. While the porridge cooked, stirred occasionally with a wooden spoon worn smooth from use, Elias prepared his coffee. The beans, shipped from San Francisco and originating from Central America, were ground fresh each morning in his hand-cranked mill. The aroma of fresh ground coffee filled the small kitchen, rich and earthy, mingling with the sweet scent of the cooking oats. He preferred to brew his coffee in the methodical way he'd learned from a German engineer who'd passed through town the previous year, measuring the grounds precisely, pouring the hot water slowly, allowing the coffee to steep for exactly 4 minutes before straining it through a cloth filter. The resulting brew was clear and strong, without the bitter sediment that plagued the coffee served in most of the town's establishments. As he ate his breakfast at the small wooden table, Elias reviewed his schedule for the day, written in his neat hand in his journal. Tuesday, May 15, 1883. The date was circled, reminding him that his monthly bath at Jensen's bathhouse was scheduled for that evening, a luxury he allowed himself in addition to his daily washing. The bathhouse, with its hot water heated by coal-fired boilers in its private rooms, was one of Park City's more civilized amenities, though at 50 cents per bath, it was an expense many could not regularly afford. His work schedule showed 3 instruments requiring attention: a surveyor's transit that needed recalibration, a pocket compass whose needle had become sluggish, likely due to magnetization issues, and a new commission, a specialized thermometer for Dr. Hodges to use in his medical practice, designed to be more accurate than the standard instruments available through mail-order catalogs. With breakfast completed and the dishes washed and dried, another habit that marked him as fastidious, Elias moved to the front of his shop to prepare for the business day. The shop faced Main Street, with large windows that he'd had specially installed to provide maximum natural light for his detailed work. He unlocked the front door, turning the sign from closed to open, though he expected few customers this early in the morning. The shop itself was a testament to organization and precision. Along one wall stood glass-fronted cabinets displaying various instruments: compasses, sextants, surveyor's chains, thermometers, barometers, and other tools of measurement and navigation. Each was polished to a shine, brass gleaming warmly in the morning light that streamed through the windows. His primary workbench dominated the center of the room, its surface scarred from years of use but kept scrupulously clean. Above it, on specially constructed shelves, were arranged his tools, files of varying coarseness, tiny hammers, specialized screwdrivers, pliers so small they seemed made for a fairy's use, and magnifying glasses of different powers. Everything had its place, and everything was in its place. Elias removed the dust covers from his current projects, examining each in the clear morning light. The surveyor's transit sat partially disassembled, its brass components laid out on a piece of black velvet. He picked up his jeweler's loupe, fixing it to his eye, and began examining the tiny screws that controlled the instrument's fine adjustments. One showed signs of wear, the threads slightly stripped. It would need to be replaced. Fortunately, he had learned to cut such precise threads himself, using a tiny lathe he'd purchased from a watchmaker in Denver. The work required absolute concentration and steady hands. He began by measuring the damaged screw with his calipers, noting the measurements in his journal. Then, selecting a piece of brass rod of the appropriate diameter, he secured it in his lathe. The lathe, operated by a foot pedal that left his hands free, was one of his most prized possessions. He had saved for 2 years to afford it, but it had paid for itself many times over in the precision work it allowed him to perform. As he worked, the sounds of Park City waking up fully reached his ears through the open windows. Horses and wagons rumbled past, their drivers calling out greetings to one another. The distant sound of the mine whistles announced the change of shifts, and he could imagine the streams of miners making their way up the hillsides to the various mine entrances that dotted the mountains like hollow eyes. Around 9 o'clock, the bell above his door chimed, announcing his first customer of the day. Elias looked up from his work to see Thomas McKendrick, one of the senior surveyors for the Silver King Mining Company, entering with a leather case under his arm. "Morning, Elias," Thomas said, removing his hat and wiping his brow with a handkerchief. Though the morning was still cool, the walk from the mining company offices had brought a sheen of perspiration to his face. "Good morning, Thomas," Elias replied, carefully setting down his tools and rising to greet his customer. "What brings you in today?" Thomas set the leather case on the counter and opened it to reveal a theodolite, one of the most precise surveying instruments available. "We've been having trouble with accuracy in our underground surveys. I suspect this instrument may have been damaged when one of the junior surveyors dropped it last week, though he didn't see fit to mention it until our measurements stopped making sense." Elias carefully lifted the theodolite from its case, his practiced hands immediately noting a slight looseness in one of the adjustment knobs. "I'll need to examine it thoroughly," he said, already mentally cataloging the tests he would need to perform. "The internal optics may be misaligned, and the leveling mechanism seems to have play in it." "How long do you think it will take?" Thomas asked. "We've got important survey work scheduled for next week." 3 days, if nothing is broken beyond repair, Elias estimated. "If I need to fabricate new parts, perhaps 5. I'll send word as soon as I know more." They discussed the fee. Elias charged fairly but never undersold his expertise, and Thomas departed with a receipt and Elias's assurance that the instrument would receive his full attention. Alone again, Elias began his systematic examination of the theodolite. Using his own calibrated instruments as references, he checked every angle, every adjustment, every optical element. The work was painstaking, requiring not just technical knowledge but an almost intuitive understanding of how these precision instruments functioned. As the sun reached its zenith, warming his shop to a comfortable temperature that allowed him to remove his coat, Elias paused in his work to rest his eyes and take his midday meal. Extended close work could strain even the best eyes, and he had learned to take regular breaks to preserve his vision, his most valuable asset in his profession. His lunch was simple but nourishing: bread from Kohler's bakery, still fresh from the morning's baking, cheese that Mrs. Chen had told him came from a Swiss family's dairy farm in the valley, and an apple that had been stored through the winter in a root cellar and still retained much of its crispness. He also made a point of drinking a full glass of water, having read about the importance of proper hydration for maintaining good health. As he ate, Elias reflected on the state of health and medicine in Park City. It was a subject that occupied his thoughts frequently, particularly given his scientific bent and his regular correspondence with his physician brother back in Philadelphia. The mining town, for all its growth and prosperity, was a place where disease could spread rapidly through the crowded boarding houses and unsanitary conditions that many of the workers endured. Just last winter, there had been an outbreak of diphtheria that had claimed several lives, particularly among the children. Dr. Hodges had worked tirelessly, implementing quarantine measures that some had resisted, seeing them as interference with their freedom. Elias had supported the doctor's efforts, understanding as he did the principles of disease transmission, though such understanding was far from universal in 1883. The miners themselves faced constant health challenges. Silicosis, though not yet named or fully understood, claimed many who had spent years breathing in the rock dust from drilling and blasting. They called it miners' consumption or dust on the lungs, and Elias had seen strong men reduced to wheezing shadows of themselves, unable to climb a flight of stairs without gasping for breath. Then there were the accidents, cave-ins, explosions, falls down shafts. Hardly a week went by without someone being carried to Dr. Hodges's office with broken bones, lacerations, or worse. The doctor did his best with the limited resources available, but serious injuries often meant a grim prognosis. There was talk of establishing a proper hospital in Park City, but for now, the seriously injured or ill had to be transported to Salt Lake City, a journey that many did not survive. After lunch, Elias returned to his workbench, this time to begin work on the specialized thermometer for Dr. Hodges. The doctor had specifically requested an instrument that could measure body temperature more accurately than the standard thermometers available, having read about recent developments in medical thermometry in European medical journals. Creating a precision thermometer required not just skill but artistry. Elias began by selecting a glass tube of uniform bore from his supplies. The glass had been specially ordered from a scientific instrument supplier in Chicago, guaranteed to be of consistent internal diameter throughout its length. Any variation would affect the accuracy of the temperature readings. He carefully sealed one end of the tube using his alcohol lamp, the flame hot enough to melt glass but controllable enough for delicate work. The sealed end needed to be perfectly rounded, without any thin spots that might break under thermal stress. He rotated the tube constantly in the flame, his movements smooth and practiced, watching as the glass glowed orange and gradually formed the desired shape. Next came the creation of the bulb that would hold the mercury. This required blowing a small, uniform sphere at the sealed end of the tube, a skill that had taken him months to master when he first began making thermometers. Too large, and the thermometer would be slow to respond to temperature changes. Too small, and it wouldn't contain enough mercury to provide accurate readings across the required range. As he worked, bent over his bench in deep concentration, Elias was aware of the life of the town continuing outside his windows. The afternoon stagecoach arrived with its usual fanfare, the driver shouting to clear the way as he navigated down Main Street. Children released from school ran past, their voices high and excited. A drunk miner stumbled by, singing an off-key rendition of "Oh, Susanna," probably expelled from one of the saloons for starting his celebrating too early in the day. But none of this disturbed Elias's concentration. When working on precision instruments, he could narrow his focus to exclude everything but the task at hand. It was a form of meditation, he supposed, though he wouldn't have used that term. It was simply the state of mind required for his work. Around 3 o'clock, as Elias was carefully calibrating the scale on the new thermometer, Dr. Hodges himself appeared in the shop. The doctor was a man of perhaps 50 years, with steel-gray hair and keen blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at a glance. He carried his medical bag, as always, for one never knew when his services might be required. "Good afternoon, Elias," the doctor said, setting his bag on the counter with obvious fatigue. "I hope I'm not interrupting crucial work." "Not at all, Doctor," Elias replied, carefully setting aside the thermometer. "In fact, I was just working on your commission. Would you like to see the progress?" Dr. Hodges examined the partially completed thermometer with interest, his trained eye appreciating the precision of the work. "Excellent," he murmured. "The gradations will be fine enough to detect even slight fever variations?" "They will," Elias assured him. "I'm marking at intensive degrees, and the mercury column is thin enough to show even smaller variations if you look closely. I've also reinforced the glass to make it less likely to break during normal use." The doctor nodded appreciatively, then his expression grew more serious. "I'm glad you're taking care with it. We've had 3 more cases of typhoid reported this week. I fear we may be looking at another outbreak if we can't identify and isolate the source quickly." Typhoid fever was a constant threat in mining towns, where water supplies could easily become contaminated with human waste. Elias knew the doctor had been advocating for better sanitation measures, including proper sewage disposal and protected water sources, but progress was slow. Many in positions of power saw such measures as unnecessary expenses that would cut into mining profits. Are the cases connected? Elias asked, his scientific mind immediately interested in the epidemiological puzzle. All three men lived in the same boarding house on Park Avenue, Dr. Hodges replied. I've advised the proprietor to boil all water and to line the privy, but whether he'll follow through. The doctor shrugged, his expression conveying his frustration with the general ignorance about disease prevention. They discussed the situation further, two educated men in a rough town, trying to apply scientific principles to public health in an era when many still believed disease was caused by bad air or moral failings. Elias mentioned articles he'd read about the work of Dr. John Snow in London, who had traced a cholera outbreak to a contaminated water pump. Dr. Hodges was familiar with the work and had been trying to apply similar principles in Park City, though with limited success. After the doctor departed, Elias reflected on the state of medical care in Park City as he returned to his work. Dr. Hodges was competent and dedicated, trained at a proper medical school back east, but he was often fighting an uphill battle against ignorance, superstition, and limited resources. Many of the miners and their families still preferred folk remedies to scientific medicine. Patent medicines, sold by traveling salesmen and in the general stores, promised cures for everything from consumption to cancer, though most contained little more than alcohol and flavoring, with perhaps some opium or cocaine for good measure. Elias had analyzed some of these concoctions out of curiosity, using his chemical knowledge and equipment, and had been appalled by what he found. There was Mrs. O'Brien, who swore by her grandmother's Irish remedies, poultices of onions for chest congestion, willow bark tea for fever, which, Elias had to admit, did contain salicylic acid and actually worked, and various charms and prayers for more serious ailments. There was the Chinese herbalist, Dr. Wei, who served the small but growing Chinese community and whose treatments, while based on entirely different principles than Western medicine, seemed to achieve remarkable results in some cases. Then there were the truly dangerous practitioners, the self-proclaimed doctors with no training who set up shop until run out of town, the abortionists who operated in back rooms with dirty instruments, the tooth pullers who spread infection with their unsterilized tools. Dr. Hodges did his best to educate the public about the dangers of such quacks, but desperation and poverty often drove people to seek whatever help they could afford. Dental care was particularly primitive. There was no trained dentist in Park City. Those with tooth problems either suffered in silence, treated themselves with laudanum or whiskey, or submitted to having teeth pulled by the barber or, in extreme cases, the blacksmith. Elias had heard horrific stories of infections spreading from bad teeth to kill otherwise healthy individuals. He maintained his own dental hygiene religiously and had even convinced a few friends to adopt toothbrushing, though most remained skeptical. As the afternoon wore on, Elias received several more customers. A miner came in with a pocket compass that no longer pointed north, likely exposed to strong magnetic fields in the mine. A young surveyor's assistant nervously presented a damaged chain that his supervisor didn't know had been broken. The wife of a mining executive brought in a barometer that had stopped functioning, hoping it could be repaired as it had been a wedding gift from her late father. Each instrument presented its own challenges, its own puzzles to solve. Elias treated each with equal care, whether it was a simple compass worth $1 or a complex chronometer worth $100. His reputation had been built on this democratic approach to his craft. He gave every customer and every instrument his full attention and expertise. Between customers, he continued his work on the various projects, switching between them as his eyes and hands needed variety. Too long on one type of work could lead to fatigue and errors. He had learned to recognize the signs of strain: a slight tremor in his hands, a blurring of vision, a tendency to hold his breath while concentrating, and to take appropriate breaks. During one such break, he stood at his window, stretching his back and shoulders, watching the life of Park City pass by. A group of children were playing with hoops, racing them down the slight incline of Main Street. A Chinese laundryman passed with his cart, collecting dirty clothes from the various businesses and boarding houses. Two miners, already showing the effects of an afternoon spent in the saloons, were engaged in a heated but apparently friendly argument about the relative merits of different types of drilling equipment. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The light in his shop had taken on a golden quality that made the brass instruments glow as if lit from within. It was Elias's favorite time of day, when the harsh mountain sun softened into something altogether more gentle and forgiving. As 5 o'clock approached, Elias began to close up his shop for the day. He carefully covered his work in progress, made final notes in his journal about what had been accomplished and what remained to be done, and secured his valuable instruments in the safe he had shipped from San Francisco, a necessary precaution in a town where not everyone respected the property of others. Tonight was his scheduled visit to Jensen's bathhouse, and he looked forward to it with anticipation. While his daily washing kept him cleaner than many, there was something deeply satisfying about a full hot bath, the opportunity to soak tired muscles and truly cleanse oneself of the accumulated grime of daily life. He prepared his bathing kit, a clean change of underclothes, his personal soap. He didn't trust the harsh lye soap provided by the bathhouse, a fresh towel, again, preferring his own to the communal ones, and a small bottle of bay rum for after his bath. Some might consider such preparations excessive, but Elias had seen too many skin ailments that he suspected were transmitted through shared bathing facilities to take any chances. Jensen's bathhouse was a 2-story wooden building 3 blocks from Elias's shop. Old Jensen, a Norwegian immigrant, had recognized the business opportunity in providing bathing facilities to a population of miners who often lived in quarters with no running water. The bathhouse offered both private rooms for those who could afford them and communal bathing areas for those who couldn't. As Elias walked toward the bathhouse, the evening air cool against his face, he passed the usual evening scenes of Park City life. The saloons were beginning to fill with miners coming off shift, their voices growing louder as the whiskey flowed. The respectable women of the town were hurrying home before full dark, when the streets became the domain of the gamblers, drinkers, and ladies of negotiable virtue. He nodded to several acquaintances, Mr. Goldstein, the tailor, closing up his shop, Mrs. Patterson, the minister's wife, carrying a basket that likely contained food for some family in need, young Timothy Chen, son of the general store proprietor, practicing with his hoop in front of his family's shop despite his mother's calls to come inside. Jensen's bathhouse was warm and humid when Elias entered, the air thick with steam from the constantly heated water. Old Jensen himself was at the desk, his broad Norwegian face red from the heat, his massive hands recording entries in his ledger. "Ah, Mr. Thornbridge," he boomed in his accented English. "Right on time, as always. Your usual room is ready." Elias paid his 50 cents and received a brass token with the number 3 on it, his preferred bathing room, the one farthest from the noisy communal area and with the best ventilation. He made his way down the narrow hallway, the sound of splashing and conversation from the communal baths echoing off the walls. The private bathing room was small but clean, containing a large sink tub, a small stool, hooks for clothing, and a mirror that was perpetually fogged with steam. Elias locked the door behind him. Privacy was a luxury he was willing to pay for, and began to undress, folding his clothes neatly and placing them well away from the splash zone. A knock on the door announced the arrival of the bath attendant, a young man named Eric, Jensen's nephew, who had recently arrived from Norway. Eric entered with 2 large buckets of steaming water, which he poured into the tub with practiced efficiency. It took 6 buckets to fill the tub to a comfortable level, and Eric made 3 trips, each time bringing water that was almost too hot to touch. Finally alone with his bath, Elias tested the water with his hand, then slowly lowered himself into the tub. The heat was intense at first, almost painful, but as his body adjusted, it became deeply pleasurable. He could feel the tension in his muscles beginning to relax, the accumulated stress of precise work melting away. He washed himself thoroughly with his own soap, starting with his hair and working downward. The soap lathered richly, its scent of castile and lavender a marked improvement over the harsh smell of lye. He paid particular attention to his feet, which despite his daily washing, had accumulated the persistent dust of Park City's streets. He had seen cases of foot rot among miners who went weeks without removing their boots, the skin breaking down into painful, infected sores. Such conditions were entirely preventable with proper hygiene, yet they remained common. As he soaked, Elias reflected on the luxury that hot, clean water represented in a frontier town. Back in Philadelphia, his brother's house had running water and even a water closet, innovations that seemed impossibly distant from Park City's current state of development. Here, water had to be hauled from wells or streams, heated on stoves, and carefully conserved. The bathhouse, with its coal-fired boilers and relatively abundant hot water, was a small oasis of civilization in an otherwise rough environment. His solitude was interrupted by voices from the adjacent bathing room. Two men had entered, their conversation carrying clearly through the thin walls. Elias recognized the voices. They belonged to James Morrison, superintendent of the Anchor Mine, and Dr. Carl Weber, a German geologist who consulted for several of the mining companies. "The vein is playing out," Morrison was saying, his voice heavy with concern. "We're having to go deeper, and the water problem is getting worse." The geological surveys confirm this," Weber replied in his accented English. "The silver ore continues downward, but the water table, it rises to meet us. Soon the pumping costs will exceed the value of the ore we extract." Their conversation turned to technical matters, pump capacities, shaft angles, or grades, the complex calculations that determined whether a mine prospered or failed. Elias listened with half an ear, his mind wandering to the precision instruments he created that made such calculations possible. Without accurate surveying equipment, the mines would be unable to follow the veins of ore through the mountain. Without reliable assaying tools, they couldn't determine the value of what they extracted. The conversation in the next room shifted to matters of health, as Morrison mentioned that several of his miners had come down with what appeared to be pneumonia. "The dust and the damp," he said. "It's a deadly combination. We've lost 3 men this month, and not from accidents." "The ventilation must be improved," Weber stated. "In the German mines, we use forced air systems. The initial cost is high, but the savings in lost labor make it worthwhile." "Try explaining that to the board of directors," Morrison replied bitterly. "They see only this quarter's profits, not the long-term costs of sick and dying workers." Elias found himself nodding in agreement, though the men couldn't see him. It was a common problem in Park City, the pursuit of quick profits at the expense of worker health and safety. The mining companies that took a longer view, investing in safety equipment and better working conditions, often found themselves at a competitive disadvantage against those that cut corners. After nearly an hour of soaking, the water had cooled to lukewarm, and Elias reluctantly climbed from the tub. He dried himself thoroughly with his own towel, then applied a small amount of bay rum to his face and neck. The alcohol-based tonic was refreshing and left him feeling properly clean and civilized. He dressed in his fresh underclothes and his street clothes, packing his worn items in the small bag he'd brought. The mirror had cleared somewhat of steam, and he examined his reflection, a lean face, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, hair still damp but neatly combed. He looked, he thought with some satisfaction, like what he was, a professional man, a craftsman of precision instruments, a small but important cog in the great machine of Western expansion and industrialization. Leaving the bathhouse, Elias stepped into the full darkness of evening. The mountains were black silhouettes against a sky brilliant with stars. One advantage of Park City's remote location was the spectacular night sky, unpolluted by the smoke and lights of larger cities. He paused for a moment, looking up at the constellation of Orion, clearly visible in the spring sky. Navigation by the stars was becoming a lost art with the advent of better maps and surveying techniques, but Elias still found comfort in the eternal patterns above. The walk back to his shop took him past scenes of Park City's nightlife. The Silver Dollar Saloon was in full swing, piano music and raucous laughter spilling into the street. Through the windows, he could see miners spending their hard-earned wages on whiskey and cards, some already showing signs of heavy intoxication. Tomorrow, many would wake with empty pockets and pounding heads, but tonight they were kings of their small world. He passed a group of what the town euphemistically called soiled doves, the prostitutes who serviced the largely male population of miners. They stood on the corner near the Imperial Hotel, their bright dresses and painted faces a sharp contrast to the respectable women who wouldn't be caught on the streets after dark. Elias tipped his hat politely as he passed. He saw no point in pretending they didn't exist, as some did, when they were as much a part of Park City's ecosystem as the miners and merchants. One of them, a woman named Rose whom he'd once treated with respect when she'd come to his shop to have a locket repaired, called out, "Evening, Mr. Thornbridge. Working late again?" "Just returning from the bathhouse, Miss Rose," he replied. "I trust you're well." "Well enough," she said with a sad smile. "Though I'd be better if more men in this town bathe as regular as you do." Back in his shop, Elias climbed the stairs to his living quarters, feeling refreshed from his bath but also tired from the day's precise work. Supper would be simple tonight. He had neither the energy nor the inclination for elaborate cooking. He lit the oil lamps in his small kitchen, their warm glow pushing back the darkness. From his icebox, a luxury that required regular deliveries of ice cut from high mountain lakes and stored in sawdust, he retrieved a portion of beef stew that Mrs. Kowalski, who ran a small restaurant 2 blocks away, had sold him the previous day. He placed it in a pot on his stove to warm, the rich smell of beef and vegetables soon filling the room. While the stew heated, he sliced bread from the loaf he'd purchased that morning, spread it with butter that was just on the edge of turning rancid. Fresh dairy products were hard to keep in a town without proper refrigeration, and set his small table with a single place setting. Eating alone had been difficult at first when he'd arrived in Park City, accustomed as he was to family dinners in Philadelphia. Now, it had become a peaceful ritual, a time for reflection and planning. As he ate, he reviewed his account books by lamplight. Business had been good lately. The mining boom meant constant demand for surveying and assaying equipment, and his reputation for quality work allowed him to charge premium prices. He was able to save a considerable portion of his earnings, which he kept partly in the local bank and partly in gold coins hidden in a secret compartment he'd built into his safe. His thoughts turned to the future. At 42, he was no longer a young man. Did he intend to spend the rest of his life in Park City, crafting instruments for the mines? Part of him longed for the cultured life of Philadelphia, the libraries, the scientific lectures, the society of educated men and women. But another part had grown to appreciate the freedom and opportunity of the West, where a man was judged more by his competence than his pedigree. There was also the question of family. He had never married, too focused on perfecting his craft and establishing his business to court seriously. Now, the unmarried women of appropriate age in Park City were few, and most were looking for husbands who could provide more excitement or wealth than a quiet instrument maker. He corresponded with a widow in Denver, a Mrs. Sarah Brennan, whom he'd met at a scientific exposition the previous year. She was intelligent and kind, with an interest in natural philosophy that matched his own. Perhaps, he thought, he should make another trip to Denver soon. After supper, with his dishes washed and put away, Elias indulged in one of his favorite evening activities, astronomical observation. He had constructed a small telescope, not as powerful as the great refractors used by professional astronomers but sufficient for amateur observation. On clear nights like this, when the mountain air was still and transparent, he could see the rings of Saturn, the moons of Jupiter, and the nebulous clouds of distant star clusters. He set up the telescope on the small balcony outside his bedroom, wrapping himself in a wool blanket against the night chill. The stars were magnificent tonight, the Milky Way stretching across the sky like a river of light. Through his telescope, he observed the planet Mars, currently in a favorable position for viewing. He sketched what he saw in his observation journal, noting the date, time, and atmospheric conditions. As he observed, his mind wandered to the connections between his astronomical observations and his daily work. The same principles of optics that allowed him to see distant planets applied to the surveying instruments he repaired. The same mathematical precision required to calculate planetary orbits was needed to calibrate a compass or theodolite. Science, he reflected, was all of a piece. Understanding one aspect helped in understanding others. The sounds of Park City's nightlife drifted up to his balcony. A fight had broken out in front of one of the saloons, the sounds of scuffling and cursing clear in the still air. Someone was playing a fiddle badly, the screeching notes making him wince. A baby cried in one of the nearby houses, its wails soon soothed by what sounded like a mother's lullaby. These were the sounds of humanity, messy and chaotic, so different from the silent, orderly progression of the stars above. Yet both were part of the same universe, governed by the same natural laws. Even the most dissolute miner, drunk and brawling in the street, was made of the same elements as the stars: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, forged in the hearts of ancient suns. It was a thought that filled Elias with a sense of wonder and connection to something larger than himself. As 10 o'clock approached, late by Park City standards, where most rose with the dawn, Elias began his evening preparations for bed. He brought his telescope inside, carefully cleaning the lenses with a soft cloth before storing it in its wooden case. His observation journal was updated with final notes about the evening's viewing. He performed his evening hygiene routine, washing his face and hands again, cleaning his teeth with his homemade powder, combing his hair. These rituals, he had found, helped signal to his body and mind that it was time to rest. He had read about the importance of regular sleep patterns for health, and he tried to maintain consistent bedtimes and rising times. In his bedroom, he changed into his nightshirt, a comfortable garment of soft cotton that had been washed so many times it was thin as paper in places. He would need to order new ones soon from the catalog, or perhaps ask Mrs. Chen if she could obtain them from her suppliers. Before getting into bed, he performed one final ritual, checking that all the lamps were extinguished, the stove properly banked for the night, and the doors securely locked. Park City had its share of thieves and desperados, and while his shop had never been robbed, he saw no reason to tempt fate through carelessness. Finally in bed, covered by his mother's quilts, Elias allowed his mind to review the day. It had been a good day, productive, peaceful, profitable. He had advanced several projects, helped customers with their instrument needs, and maintained his health through proper nutrition and hygiene. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new problems to solve, new instruments to create or repair. He thought about the thermometer he was making for Dr. Hodges, and how it might help in diagnosing and treating fever. Such a small thing, a tube of glass with mercury inside, yet it could mean the difference between life and death if it helped the doctor detect typhoid early. This was his contribution to the growth of civilization in the West, not the dramatic exploits of gunfighters or the bold ventures of prospectors, but the quiet, precise work of creating tools that others could use to build, to explore, to heal. As sleep began to claim him, Elias listened to the night sounds of Park City settling into slumber. The saloons were still active but growing quieter. The stamp mills at some of the mines continued their rhythmic pounding. They ran 24 hours a day, processing the ore that was the lifeblood of the town. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, answered by another, then another, until someone shouted for quiet and they subsided. In his drowsy state, Elias's mind wandered through memories and half-formed dreams. He remembered his apprenticeship in Philadelphia, learning the art of instrument making from old Hans Müller, a German immigrant who had trained in the finest workshops of Berlin. Müller had been a taskmaster, demanding absolute precision, accepting no excuses for sloppy work. "A compass that is wrong by 1 degree," he would say in his thick accent, "will lead a man miles from his destination. Lives depend on our accuracy." He thought about the journey west, the long train rides through increasingly wild landscape, the decision to settle in Park City rather than Denver or San Francisco. It had been a gamble, coming to a mining town rather than an established city, but the gamble had paid off. Here, he was not just another instrument maker competing with dozens of others. He was the instrument maker, the man people trusted with their most important tools. His thoughts turned to health and mortality, perhaps triggered by his conversation with Dr. Hodges about the typhoid outbreak. Life in Park City was precarious. Disease, accident, violence, death was always near in a mining town. Yet people continued to come, drawn by the promise of silver and the chance for wealth. They accepted the risks, or perhaps simply didn't fully understand them. Elias understood the risks. He had seen men die of preventable diseases, seen others maimed in accidents that proper safety equipment might have prevented. He did what he could to minimize his own risks, maintaining good hygiene, avoiding the rougher saloons where violence was common, staying clear of the mines themselves unless his work required him to enter them. But he knew that no amount of caution could eliminate risk entirely. A contaminated water supply, a stray bullet from a drunken altercation, a fall on an icy street, any of these could end his carefully ordered life. As sleep finally overtook him, Elias's thoughts became dreams, blending memory and imagination into the strange narratives of the sleeping mind. He dreamed of instruments of impossible precision, capable of measuring the very thoughts in a man's head. He dreamed of Park City transformed into a great metropolis, with paved streets and electric lights, where disease had been conquered and men lived to 100 years. He dreamed of Sarah Brennan from Denver, her kind face smiling as she examined one of his instruments, understanding immediately the craftsmanship that had gone into its creation. In his dream, she agreed to marry him, and they established a great workshop together, training apprentices in the art of precision instrument making. The dream shifted and flowed like water. He was back in Philadelphia, showing his brother the telescope he'd made, the two of them boys again despite his brother being a distinguished physician. They were looking at the stars from the roof of their childhood home, their mother calling them to come in before they caught cold. Then he was in the mines, deep underground where the air was thick with dust and the walls pressed close. Miners were asking him to fix their breathing, to create an instrument that could clean the air of the deadly particles that were slowly killing them. He tried to explain that this was beyond his abilities, but they wouldn't listen, pressing closer, their faces gaunt and desperate. The dream shifted again, and he was in his workshop, but it was filled with light, not from oil lamps but from some unknown source that made every surface glow. He was working on an instrument of incredible complexity, its purpose unclear but its importance absolute. As he worked, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction, of purpose fulfilled, of a life well lived in service to precision and truth. In the deepest part of the night, when Park City was at its quietest, Elias slept profoundly. His breathing was regular and deep, his body completely relaxed. This was the restorative sleep that his regular habits and good health afforded him, unlike the restless, alcohol-disturbed sleep of many miners, or the worried, interrupted sleep of those burdened by debt or illness. Outside, the town slept as well. The saloons had finally closed, their patrons stumbling home or sleeping it off in alleys and doorways. The prostitutes had retired to their rooms, counting their earnings or nursing their private sorrows. The respectable citizens were safe in their beds, doors barred against the dangers of the night. Only the mines continued their ceaseless activity. Deep underground, men worked by candlelight, drilling and blasting, loading cars, pushing always deeper into the mountain. The night shift was considered the worst, cold, dark, with the mountain seeming to press more heavily in the darkness. But the silver didn't care whether it was day or night, and the companies demanded maximum production. In the boarding houses, men coughed in their sleep, their lungs struggling with the dust that had infiltrated deep into the tissue. Some would not live to see another spring. Others would leave Park City when they could no longer work, returning to families back east or seeking warmer climates where they could breathe more easily. A few would strike it rich and escape to healthier lives, but for most, the mines were a slow death sentence, trading years of life for daily wages. Dr. Hodges, wakeful in his own bed, worried about the typhoid outbreak. He had identified the boarding house where it started, but tracking the source was proving difficult. Was it the water? The food? A carrier who showed no symptoms? He needed better diagnostic tools, better medicines, better everything. The thermometer Elias was making would help, but it was just one small tool against an array of diseases that seemed to grow more numerous each year as the town became more crowded. At 3 a.m, Elias stirred briefly, some sound or sensation bringing him near to waking. Perhaps it was the whistle from one of the mines signaling a shift change, or the cry of a night bird, or simply his body adjusting position. He pulled the quilts closer, unconsciously seeking warmth as the night temperature dropped toward its lowest point. In his semi-conscious state, he heard the familiar sounds of his building settling, the creak of wood contracting in the cold, the scurry of mice in the walls. Despite his efforts with traps and poison, they were persistent visitors, the soft whistle of wind through a gap in the window frame he kept meaning to seal. These sounds were comforting in their familiarity. This building, this room, this bed, they had become home in a way that his childhood house in Philadelphia had never quite been. There, he had been the younger son, the dreamy one always tinkering with mechanisms while his brother studied medicine and his sister learned the domestic arts proper to a young lady. Here, he was himself, complete and sufficient, his life ordered according to his own preferences and needs. He thought drowsily about the day ahead. Wednesday. The surveyor's transit should be ready for testing. He would need to take it outside, sight on known points, verify that his repairs had restored its accuracy. The compass with the sluggish needle would require demagnetization, a delicate process involving gradually decreasing alternating magnetic fields. And the thermometer, he should be able to complete it tomorrow if there were no interruptions. There was also correspondence to attend to. A letter from his instrument supplier in Chicago confirming his order of brass stock and optical glass. A reply to his brother's latest letter, which had contained worrying news about their sister's husband's business failures. And perhaps, if he could find the courage, a letter to Sarah Brennan in Denver, suggesting that he might visit next month when the mountain passes were fully clear of snow. Sleep reclaimed him before these thoughts could fully form into plans, pulling him back down into the deep rest his body needed to face another day of precise work. As 4:30 approached, the first subtle signs of the coming dawn began to appear. The sky in the east, though still full dark to casual observation, showed the faintest lightning to those who knew to look for it. The birds, sensing the approaching day, began their first tentative calls, not yet the full dawn chorus, but isolated chirps and whistles that would soon build to a symphony. In his sleep, Elias's body began its own preparations for waking. His temperature rose slightly, his breathing became less deep, his muscles began the tiny movements that would prevent stiffness upon rising. These were automatic processes, governed by internal rhythms as precise as any clockwork he might repair. The town, too, began its earliest stirrings. Bakers were already at work, their ovens fired up to produce the bread that would feed the town's workers. The Chinese laundrymen were heating water for the day's washing. In the hotels and boarding houses, cooks were beginning breakfast preparations, stoking fires, mixing batter for flapjacks, slicing bacon from salted slabs. The night shift miners were completing their final tasks underground, looking forward to emerging into daylight, however brief their exposure might be before heading to their beds. The day shift would soon be rising, preparing for another descent into the darkness, another day of hard labor in pursuit of silver wealth that most would never share. This changing of the guard, this transition from night to day, was as regular as the movement of the stars Elias had observed the evening before. It was part of the great rhythm of the town, as predictable and necessary as the beating of a heart. Still sleeping, Elias shifted position one final time, his body finding the perfect comfort in the pre-dawn coolness. The quilts his mother had made were worn soft with years of use, their patterns faded but their warmth undiminished. They smelled faintly of the lavender sachets he placed in his wardrobe, a small luxury that reminded him of his mother's linen closets back in Philadelphia. In perhaps 30 minutes, he would wake naturally, his internal clock as reliable as any timepiece. He would begin another day of careful, precise work, contributing in his small way to the great project of bringing civilization and scientific progress to the American West. He would maintain his health through careful hygiene and diet, knowing that his skills were valuable only as long as he could perform them. The thermometer he was making for Dr. Hodges would be completed, calibrated, and delivered. It would be used to detect fevers, to monitor the progress of illness, to make decisions about treatment. Lives might be saved because of its accuracy. This was no small thing, though it would never make headlines like a rich silver strike or a gunfight on Main Street. This was Elias Thornbridge's life, ordered, purposeful, careful. He was not a hero of the Wild West in any traditional sense. He had never faced down an outlaw, never discovered a fortune in silver, never led a wagon train through hostile territory. But in his workshop, with his precise instruments and steady hands, he was helping to build something lasting, a foundation of scientific accuracy upon which others could construct the future. The stars he had observed were wheeling toward morning, their ancient patterns unchanged by human ambition or suffering. The planets continued their stately orbits, indifferent to the struggles of the tiny beings on one small world. But those beings, through careful observation and measurement, through instruments like the ones Elias created, were beginning to understand their place in the cosmos. As the chronicle of this single day in Elias Thornbridge's life draws to a close, he sleeps on, peaceful and untroubled. In a few minutes, he will wake to begin the cycle again: washing, shaving, breakfast, work, the endless attention to detail that defines his existence. Today had brought no dramatic events, no life-changing revelations. It had been a day of small satisfactions: a successfully repaired instrument, a pleasant bath, a clear night for astronomical observation. These small satisfactions, accumulated over years, comprised a life well lived. In Park City, as the night gives way to approaching dawn, life continues in all its complexity. Men are born and die, fortunes are made and lost, love is found and betrayed. The mines yield their silver reluctantly, demanding payment in sweat, blood, and lives. The town grows and changes, new buildings rising, new businesses opening, new people arriving with their hopes and dreams. Through it all, there is need for precision, for accuracy, for the careful measurement that allows human enterprise to proceed. Maps must be drawn, or must be assayed, Temperatures must be taken, time must be kept. This is the realm of the scientific instrument maker, the quiet craftsman whose work underlies all other achievements. Elias Thornbridge sleeps peacefully in his narrow bed, his breathing regular, his conscience clear. He has lived this day as he lives all days, with attention to health, dedication to craft, and respect for the scientific principles that govern both his instruments and his life. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but also new opportunities to practice his art, to contribute to the growth of his adopted town, to maintain the standards of precision that give meaning to his existence. The quilts rise and fall gently with his breathing. The room is quiet save for the subtle sounds of night giving way to day. Soon, the sun will rise over the mountains, bringing light and warmth to Park City. The mines will echo with the sound of drilling and blasting. The streets will fill with the bustle of commerce. And in his workshop on Main Street, Elias Thornbridge will continue his patient, careful work, creating and maintaining the instruments that help transform the Wild West from frontier to civilization. As our story ends where it began, with Elias sleeping peacefully in the pre-dawn darkness, we might reflect on the nature of such a life. In the grand narratives of the American West, there is little room for the Elias Thornbridges, the quiet craftsmen, the careful observers, the maintaining forces that keep society functioning. History remembers the dramatic moments, the colorful characters, the violent confrontations. But civilization is built on routine, on the daily repetition of necessary tasks, on the accumulation of small improvements. Elias's attention to hygiene and health, his careful diet, his regular bathing, these practices, multiplied across a population, are what allow towns to grow into cities, what reduce infant mortality, what extend human lifespan. His precise instruments make possible the accurate maps, the fair assays, the medical diagnoses that underpin a functioning society. In a few years, Park City will have grown beyond recognition. Electric lights will replace oil lamps. Telephone lines will connect the town to the wider world. A hospital will be built, with proper surgical facilities and trained nurses. The rough mining camp will evolve into a proper town, with schools, churches, libraries, all the institutions of civilization. Elias may or may not be there to see these changes. He might return to Philadelphia, or move to Denver to marry Sarah Brennan, or remain in Park City until his eyes can no longer perform the precise work he loves. But wherever he goes, he will carry with him the habits and practices that have served him well, the attention to detail, the respect for scientific truth, the understanding that small things done correctly add up to great achievements. For now, he sleeps, gathering strength for another day. The stars fade as dawn approaches. The mountains stand eternal, or at least eternal enough for human purposes. The silver lies waiting in the earth, indifferent to human desire. And life, in all its messy complexity, prepares to begin another day in Park City, Utah, in the year of our Lord 1883. Sleep well, Elias Thornbridge. Sleep well, all you who labor with hand and mind to build something greater than yourselves. Tomorrow comes soon enough, with all its challenges and opportunities. But for now, in these quiet moments before dawn, rest. Rest and restore. Rest and dream of the precision instruments of tomorrow, the measurements yet to be taken, the problems yet to be solved. The cycle continues, as regular as the rotation of the earth, as predictable as the path of the planets, as necessary as breath itself. This is the rhythm of life, the pattern underlying all human endeavor, the foundation upon which all else is built. And in this rhythm, in this pattern, in this foundation, there is a deep and abiding peace, the peace of purpose fulfilled, of work well done, of a life lived according to principles greater than mere survival. This is the peace that Elias Thornbridge has earned through his careful attention to his craft and his health. This is the peace that allows him to sleep soundly while others toss and turn with worry or regret. May we all find such peace in our own lives, through attention to the small things, through dedication to our chosen work, through respect for the natural laws that govern our existence. May we all sleep as soundly as a Wild West scientific instrument maker who has lived his day with purpose and precision. The story ends as gently as it began, with the soft breathing of a man at rest, the quiet sounds of a town preparing for dawn, the eternal dance of the cosmos overhead. In this quietness, in this simplicity, in this routine, there is everything, all of human life, all of human hope, all of human achievement. Rest now. Rest and restore. Tomorrow comes soon enough.